Welcome back. The newest episode of Weekly Lit, and I'm here with my co-host Antonis for a discussion of Secret History by Donna Tartt. And we're going to do this in two parts. The first part will not spoil the novel in case you haven't read it, and the second part will reveal the secrets of the secret history. So if you don't care about having it spoiled, or if you've already read it, then you'll enjoy the second half of this presentation. We already talked about Donna Tartt and made some references to her through her connection to True Grit, a favorite novel of hers. She wrote an afterword for it in a later edition, and as I mentioned, did a terrific narration of the audiobook. And so there's the connection to this week's book. Donna Tartt is written 3 books. The Secret History was the first. The second one I always forget the name of, and I haven't read it yet, which is inexcusable. And the third one is The Goldfinch. And that middle book, you know, she writes a book about every 10 years. The second one is The Little Friend, and I would be urging her to be more prolific, and yet I haven't gotten around to reading the second book yet. So that's, like I said, inexcusable, and I will correct that, and maybe we'll discuss it at some point. Anyway, the Secret History is a novel set in a small liberal arts college in Vermont with a group of students, and it's a mystery that involves a murder. Right out of the gate, the murder is revealed, and so there's no mystery as to who dies and who was involved in the crime. But the first half of the book deals with what led up to the murder, and the second half of the book deals with the aftermath. And so this book, it's an excellent read and has a lot going for it. First, the setting is very interesting. Small liberal arts college. It's a small group of students and their mentor, a professor who is a little bit mysterious, Julian, and a close-knit group of students who are all studying the classics, Greek, Roman, hence my co-host, and the great works of classical literature and language, and doing the translations and things like that, discussing Dante and the like. And so it's an elevated sense of academia, and along with this mystery interwoven into it. And Donna Tartt's style draws from a few different elements as well. In some ways, it reminds me somewhat in being Dickensian, reminiscent of Charles Dickens, because some of the names, Cloak Rayburn, in the Goldfinch, there's an attorney named Racegirdle, where they're almost Dickensian names that are humorous and evoke an image in and of themselves through the names, and elegant language, sort of like F. Scott Fitzgerald, something of that nature. And she takes her time in telling the story. So it's a good 600 pages or so, and in going through this, again, like a couple of the authors we've talked about before, Hemingway, Faulkner, I've mentioned Willa Cather for this. She does a good job of writing a protagonist of the opposite sex. So the main character, Richard, is a college-aged young man, and reminds me somewhat of My Antonia by Willa Cather, where he's certainly not a Neanderthal, sort of high testosterone fellow, but she does convey a young man's point of view and his thoughts and analysis of things that are going in as he's drawn into this. And so I think that's a good aspect of the novel. and she does a good job with the settings and intertwining the the settings and their studies with what's going on in the novel itself. Now, The Secret History is a throwback to and I'm gonna mispronounce it, Procopius, a Roman writer who wrote about a set of writings called The Secret History about the Emperor Justinian and General Belisarius, under whom he had served, and he really undercut them. You can find them on the internet. It's it'd probably take 40 minutes to read, all told, to read through them, maybe an hour. But he's sort of tattling and telling gossipy stories about the general and then the emperor. And some historians, I guess, think that he did so to protect himself, to show once, if they were overthrown, that he was not that loyal, and to protect himself. Others said he was just telling it because it was the truth, and he had either held a grudge or wanted to get the truth out. So, you know, probably somewhere in the midst of all that is the truth. So I'm going to read the prologue just to give you an idea of the starting point. So again, this will reveal the murder, but it's on the very first page of the book to begin with. So here we go with The Secret History. The snow in the mountains was melting, and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. He'd been dead for 10 days before they found him, you know. It was one of the biggest manhunts in Vermont history. State troopers, the FBI, even an Army helicopter. The college closed, the dye factory in Hamden shut down. People coming from New Hampshire, upstate New York, as far away as Boston. It is difficult to believe that Henry's modest plan could have worked so well despite these unforeseen events. We hadn't intended to hide the body where it couldn't be found. In fact, we hadn't hidden it at all, but had simply left it where it fell, in hopes that some luckless passerby would stumble over it before anyone even noticed he was missing. This was a tale that told itself simply and well. The Lutz rocks, the body at the bottom of the ravine, with a clean break in the neck and the muddy skid marks of dug-in heels, pointing the way down, a hiking accident, no more, no less. And it might have been left at that, at quiet tears and a small funeral, had it not been for the snow that fell that night. It covered him without a trace, and 10 days later, when the thaw finally came, the state troopers and the FBI and the searchers from the town all saw that they had been walking back and forth over his body until the snow above it was packed down like ice. It is difficult to believe that such an uproar took place over an act for which I was partially responsible. Even more difficult to believe I could have walked through it. The cameras, the uniforms, the black crowd sprinkled over Mount Cataract like ants in a sugar bowl, without incurring a blink of suspicion. But walking through it all was one thing. Walking away, unfortunately, has proved to be quite another. And though once I thought I had left that ravine forever on an April afternoon long ago, now I'm not so sure. And so that's, you know, sort of a haunting, chilling start, and it certainly sets the tone for what takes place afterwards. And we're going to take a little bit of a break and then come back, and I'll talk about the secrets of The Secret History. So if you haven't read it, you can stop after the break and go finish it and come back, or just plow right through. You know, it's almost a 30-year-old book, so you can't really spoil something at that age. Break, I just wanted to mention we have weeklylit@gmail.com. You can send emails, ask for recommendations, give me recommendations, make fun of what I'm doing, or contribute. Do so in the comments below, subscribe, and share it with other people. If you know people who like to read or are interested in reading and literature and poetry, pass it along so we can kind of increase the conversation here. So again, weeklylit@gmail.com, or please make comments below. And I haven't decided what we're going to address next week. I have a few thoughts, but if you have some suggestions, please feel free to do so. But a lot of ideas, obviously. There's a lot of ground to cover, so we won't have any shortage of topics. So anyway, back to the secrets of the secret history. So if you've read it and you know the conclusion, the end is, I've read it twice now. I read it years ago and then just reread it to prepare for this. And I think the end with Henry's suicide, you know, can be viewed as maybe an easy way out of a conclusion in some sense. But I think upon further analysis, I think it's appropriate in terms of how he viewed himself and an emptiness that he was seeking to fill. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit. One of the, you know, going back to the sources of this, you know, there are obvious, I think young Goodman Brown is an obvious influence on this book. I know there was a short fantasy or horror story that I read when I was in junior high school that had an element of a sort of a bacchanalian event in which presumably the devil takes place. And I know that's almost exactly like young Goodman Brown, but it was not that story. It's another story similarly involved. Well, there is a bacchanalian event in this story as well, and it's I don't want to say compelled, but certainly encouraged by Julian, the mentor. And so one of the things that I noted on the reread, and I think the first time through as well, is that Julian appears to be this caring, wise figure who is there to teach and lead and guide, but he's also manipulating a hand-picked group of students who might be vulnerable to follow his whims in what they're asked to do in terms of giving up their other courses of study and limiting themselves to the classics and really putting themselves in his hands, and then following through and being manipulated, Henry more than anyone, into the bacchanalia and what comes from that, which involves another killing, of course, the farmer, before they kill Bunny, the fellow student. And so, you know, the question that I think is worth ruminating over is how much of this was Julian's influence. And obviously he fled the scene after it was revealed that he found out what they did, not necessarily out of guilt, but just wanting to disassociate himself. And then there's plenty of other things going on. We're only taking about 12 or 14 minutes to discuss this, but there is when you're dealing with a narration like this, I've mentioned before in another talk about how much I enjoy the unreliable narrator. I think Richard is a fairly reliable narrator, but of course he's justifying his behavior and his thoughts on things. But we also have unreliable characters. In other words, when you have a conspiracy in place like this, and or a cover-up, you can't necessarily, when there's a good writer involved, you can't necessarily trust what the characters say to each other because they may be lying to each other. And so there are things like that going on that makes this a real, that puts the mystery back into it, even though you know who did it the whole time. You're just waiting to see how it pans out and how they treat each other and how they react to all of this. Now, the part that is intriguing that I picked up on the reread as well is that Henry kills himself, and this is where I think the ending maybe makes sense, and possibly what Donna Tartt intended. Henry truly believed, as presumably Julian, the mentor, did, in that there were supernatural beings out there, that, you know, perhaps even in the Greek and Roman mythos, and to some extent the others did too. Richard did not participate in the Bacchanalia. He was not part of the group at that time, but the others did. And there's a statement that you really can't fully study something or understand something unless you believe it, which is true. If you're not part of a certain religion, you can't truly understand it without believing it, if even for a time. Yeah, I think that's a valid statement, and that's in the book as well. And so the part where Henry kills himself, he is the only character without any outside faith other than Bunny, who was murdered. And Bunny would mock various religions and really would mock everybody, equal opportunity offender. But the twins and Francis were all Catholic, and Richard, I guess I would characterize as perhaps agnostic at most, certainly not an atheist, perhaps agnostic or just non-denominational, and yet he participated in funeral and attended a mass, and a Catholic mass, or separate from the funeral. That was a Protestant service, but participated in the funeral, attended it, and then at another point in time, late in the book, attends a mass with the twins and Francis, and wants to go to communion, not knowing that you're not permitted to do if you're not Catholic, because you have to be in communion with the church and believe what the church believes to accept communion. So Camilla stops him, and he understands what that's all about, and rightfully so. But that showed his, I think, a desire for faith, and to the others, certainly not perfect, none of us are, but the others who had even been lackadaisical in their faith still had faith in something that ultimately redeemed them. It did not redeem Henry and or Julian, who is roaming in the wild. So anyway, that's my secret of the secret history, and the book is worth much more discussion than that, but we've already passed the time expected. So put your comments below, shoot me an email if you like, and you can continue the discussion in the comments. Tell me what you think about the book, and any other theories you have, where I went right, where I went wrong. And so until next time, thank you for your time, and read harder.